for episode 23 of Beard Banter, which means I've almost made it to the quarter of the 100 mark, right, on shows. But I actually have an extremely special guest, probably one that everyone here that might be watching this knows quite well. I have Wes Spencer on with us today, and we're doing this on a different date and time. It's funny, Dom Kirby made fun of me because I've made this stance of it's Wednesday and it's always Wednesday. And I told Wes, man, Wednesday's the day. And he said, I can do Thursday. Oh yeah, Thursday's great. No, Thursday. That's what I meant. Thursday's great. So I'm being a hypocrite, but I'll take it and I'll tell on myself. So Wes, for anybody that doesn't know you, do you mind introducing yourself and just give a quick bio of kind of your history and what you're all about?
Yeah, for sure. So Matt, thanks for having me. I know we've been friends for some time now. I've always been wanting to go on to Beard Banner, and so I get number 23 from like the greatest basketball player of all time. You can
Yeah,
fight me
man,
on that.
Jordan, bro. There are
Yeah,
people that would fight you on that, but I'm
yeah, they
with you on
probably
the
would, but
Jordan
they'd be
camp.
wrong, But it's all sports ball to me. But yeah, so Matt, I've been a cybersecurity guy for a really long time, and
Yeah.
I think for me, where my journey began was I did come from a technical background, but I learned I'm an educator at heart.
Yeah.
And I actually spent some years even as a professor of information security and loved it. And there will be a day when I'll go back and do those things again. But I didn't like academia. It wasn't for me. And I didn't know that there was like another pathway. And so long story short, I ended up as a banking executive in IT and had a lot of leadership opportunities in some like the national circles and financial services ISAC and did a lot
Okay.
of stuff around like threat intel stuff, which is cool. And that led into me learning or getting to know Aaron Chernin, who is the founder of Perch. And we went and started that company together. That was way back in 2016. And I found that being an educator in a company like that it was huge and it was
Yeah.
super fun. And so that's when it all made sense and clicked. And then ConnectWise bought us in 2020, which seems like, I can't believe that was
Right?
2020,
It's
man.
like a decade ago at this stage,
Yeah,
right?
it's
It's
crazy.
like
Yeah.
dog years or something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. So I spent a year at ConnectWise, really helping on the security evangelism side of the
Yep.
house, which was a ton of fun. Left in March, and then now I've got a couple things in queue. But the one thing I can publicly share is I'm the channel chief over at Fifth Wall Solutions, and
Yeah.
helping them kind of develop an MSP-driven, MSP-friendly, MSP-centric go-to-market for cyber insurance, which is, as you
Well,
know, a big deal.
well, stop your plug, damn it. My guests are not allowed to plug their company, so I'll do it. Fifth Wall Insurance, they get it. I think they're heading towards a path where they understand that the data that's been put in from from a actuarial perspective is all lies, which means now we have to go get data that we can make actuarial and drive that forward. So I'll give the plug on this one, but Fifth Wall's
Appreciate that.
fantastic. So I'm glad you
Yeah.
landed there. You make a parallel, right? So think about this challenge in my mind, and I think MSPs have this same parallel challenge of if you have something that's becoming more complex or becoming in a new body of knowledge or becoming something that you haven't understood before, then you have an education gap to sell. If you make a new SIM and you price it for an MSP and you make it so you can serve that constituency, if you cannot educate the MSP on how to use it, why it's valuable, and how to sell it, then they cannot go sell it, right? And they cannot change their stack. And so when you see these big gaps of what is cybersecurity today, that's the struggle. That is the conversation being had of we've always been IT professionals, as Nathan Taylor said in an earlier episode, because we'd like to build something, because we wanted to make something beautiful, because we wanted to make something that worked. We didn't understand that there were people trying to tear down my sandcastle, that somebody was tossing a bucket of water on it all the time, right? So, becoming an educator and becoming a thought leadership marketing methodology is requisite when you have those big knowledge gaps, right? I do a lot of consulting with companies, and companies will come in with something like browser isolation, where you're now isolating the traffic in some third party space, and you're dealing with that. And I tell them, you're gonna have a hard time selling this. Why? Because there's a knowledge gap and there's an application gap. There's a gap in what is cybersecurity that hasn't been followed. There's no framework adherence. And so, summing all that up, I think the point is that you realize you're an educator really stands out to me, right? And I kind of see myself that. And if we look at what traditional channel chiefs have been in the channel, it has traditionally been persona, handshaking, someone to be your ombudsperson, someone to drive the market and the image of the company. But I wouldn't argue that it's been massively educational. And I don't mean that as a negative. It's a different thing. And so for you to have landed and realized that is kind of interesting to me, because it's a parallel of what I'm realizing, right? That
Yeah.
my goal is to teach MSPs. And if I can do that, I have 17,000 buying partners, and they're going to be better at selling, and they're going to be better at protecting themselves. They're going to have less loss. They're going to have less churn. They're going to have less problems. So I think that we might be seeing a bit of a new kind of thing emerging in that. So what are your
Totally.
thoughts? Yeah, what are your thoughts on kind of like how did that go for you? And I'd love to kind of explore some of the struggles and successes that you've seen in your career over this last 2/14 years, if we're going by dog
Yeah.
years, right?
Two
Um,
things, Matt. I mean, I love the topic of this conversation because I think it rings true with where MSPs find frustrating and where they like really miss the gap in getting where they want their organization to go and to get the client buy-in. It really does. I think if you boil it down, it comes down to an education issue. That is a huge challenge. See, like I've learned over the years that when you educate, you get buy-in. Like there's a
right.
direct corollary between the
Agreed.
two. And usually business owners, it's not that they don't want to do things, they just don't see the need for it. And that's an
Right.
education gap. Like I remember when I came into my bank, I wouldn't say my bank was like hostile or like against spending money, but when I came in, I saw some major gaps that existed. And looking at some of this, I think the bank would agree even back then of like, yeah, that let's maybe fix that problem, but I don't know why. And I remember like what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus my bank on what we're going to do is I'm just going to educate them on why this stuff matters. And so I
Sure.
remember every single board session, I would begin my 15-20 minute sessions all the time I would get with a 5 minute, hey, here's something that happened in the real world that for some reason relates, whether it's like
Yeah.
new regulation that's coming in that could affect, whether it's some kind of like financial services breach, whatever it is. And Matt, I remember the day when my bank president literally stopped me. He's just like, Wes, hold on. He goes, hey, I always preach about asset quality at this bank, post
Yeah.
2008 collapse, it's all banks care about. And he said, I'm not sure that's true anymore. He goes, I really wonder what would happen if our bank got hit by something significant and it literally took us down. Like he's like, I don't know that we
Yeah.
could survive that. Bank of America, sure. F&B, I'm not so sure about that.
Yeah.
And to me, that was like the eye-opening experience of like all I did was commit for like I don't know, 4, 5, 6 months of educate, educate, educate without like a ulterior motive. And then bam, the
Not with
buy-in
educate
happened.
and ask, right? Because if
Yes.
you term it with educate and ask, you're just doing the same stuff. They only taught me this so they could sell me this.
Yep.
Instead, you're saying, let me give you a rounded understanding of this so you can start
Yep.
thinking like me,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And yeah, so educate first was kind of the point. And the corollaries to that, and it's hard to measure ROI on that. I would have to imagine. I mean, certainly in one bank, it would be easy. And a little bit of a side point, actually, I'm serving as a celebrity judge for InfoSec Court, and they're trying Flagstar Bank.
Okay.
So
I
we've
like
got
this.
there's a public prosecutor, and then there's a private defense attorney, and they're all personas in the cybersecurity world, and we're literally just talking about their breach and talking about how those 1.5 million records could have been dealt, and ultimately sentencing them in the court of public opinion. I mean, obviously, there's no legal aspect to
Yeah.
this, but it's interesting. To your point, had those executives been educated, had they understood the totality of this, and all companies are struggling with this. Don't think this is an MSP problem or a SMB problem. This is even still a corporate problem. Now, I've often said I think corporate security is 10 to 15 years ahead of us
Yes.
at the SMB and MSP space. But even then, there's still executives that make businesses on only return on investment, that make discussions on only these things, and they can't quantify technical debt, and they can't quantify risk in the right way from a cybersecurity perspective, and they can't. And so you still have those same exact principles playing out, but at the same time, you also kind of have a drift towards things that are being correcting factors that aren't pleasant. If you look at Uber, just yesterday there was an article circulating, and I know it's a few months old, but Uber has now gotten new charges for that CISO around false claims, and around the space of DOJ prosecuting around False Claims Act and around other things. And so you're starting to see where you won't be able to plead ignorance
Yep.
because it won't get you off, but you still have to start drifting towards it. And I think that's what it takes as educators. And then you get into
Agree.
the stranger part. When you're an internal educator at a bank, you knew the surface area you had to educate. You could measure a return because it was your responsibility. Let's fast forward to when you're an educator to MSPs, and when
Yep.
you're an educator to companies that were involved in partnering with you, and or an MSPs that were selling your product. How does that change that kind of the ability to scope your effectiveness, if you will?
Yeah. So I think if you're a vendor, you have to really think through like what's the model you're selling? Are you doing a sell to or a sell through model? And,
Dude,
I
amen on
think
that
let's
one.
talk about the difference quickly, right? Like if I'm a vendor and I just make an MSP's life easier by like fixing this one thing and making it automatic, well, I'm a sell to, right? All I have to do is educate the MSP. This is why XYZ matters. But
Yep.
why and where vendors fail in the channel, especially enterprise cybersecurity vendors, is they can sort of conceptually understand this idea of like I can sell to the MSP because I'm used to selling to a client. I'll just pick a name out
Right.
there. If I'm Palo Alto, I'm really good at describing here's why Palo Alto is great. This is why you need
Yeah.
it. Yay. But if I'm going to make that work in the channel, I'm selling not to the MSP, but ultimately I'm selling through the MSP to the end client. So how do I educate my MSP to be armed with the knowledge that they need so that they can then go and share that with the client on why this matters? And I learned that the hard way, Matt, at Perch, right? Like
Okay.
teaching cybersecurity is a basis with like threat detection back in 2017 and 18 before ransomware du jour happened. Like that was difficult to get that through. And I think clients knee jerk to cybersecurity is this thing that we do and then we finish it and we're good.
Right. We
And
buy a product or we turn on a setting and then we're
Yep.
done. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And in the early days of the channel, I think not all MSPs, but many were guilty of like, you have a firewall, you have antivirus, you have backups, you're good. We checked the cybersecurity box.
I
And
was
so
guilty of
now
it.
we're forced into this re education with our clients to say, wait, actually, maybe this whole thing isn't done. And maybe there's more to cybersecurity than meets the eye. And so, yeah, you have to learn how to use that education capability to really get clients to have the buy in and understanding 100%.
Yep. Yeah, and you talk about that sell to sell through motion. I've seen MSPs that as they started to understand this, they shifted it to a sell to, right? In the sense that they started to say, I'm going to raise my prices and encompass these things, and I'm not going to give people that option. And if they don't like it, they can leave. And I was one of those, right? We started out trying to sell it and piecemeal. I first put together my new oops, I'm an idiot cybersecurity package. That's what I'll call it, right? The before I thought it was just a firewall and backup and I had settings and I had something. I'm good. And then I realized ooh, I need to deal with this malware threat, and ooh, I need to deal with this business email and dark web monitoring. So I put together a $25 a month package, started trying to sell it, and explain it, and ultimately, I realized that unless we start to get to some total understanding that this is an ongoing game, now I might be plugging my show, The Game, but that this is an ongoing game, that I had to go back and do this Eat Crow, and somebody else, what was his name, Carl Bickmore just gave a presentation where he was called $2 Carl, right? Because every time he's coming back, he's wanting $2 more for this tool or $2 more for that tool, right? And I think the point is that you're seeing almost a renaissance of understanding that corporations have at least understood the frameworks of things that are risky for a long time, and that there's been things in place, right? When you started talking about buying Sentinel One, which I loved, I bought lots of Sentinel One, I bought Perch, I understood those things because they solved a problem, but I was still being the smartest guy in the room. I was still the guy that said, I need EDR. I need a SIEM. Why? Well, because I think I do. And I've heard other people tell me, and it's the next buzzword. Marketing's all talk. But if you can educate and you can teach me that let's look at Framework CIS top 18. I need to deal with malware. I need to have account management. I need to have asset management. I need to have understanding of the software in my business. I now have a map. I now have a roadmap of that. I know the gaps that are missing. And I think the point is that I always used to have this concept of there's what I know, what I don't know, and what I don't know, I don't know. In the don't know bucket, I can contextualize from what I know. That's how I know I don't know it, right? I stubbed my toe because I didn't know the door opened end, or right, like so. Those things I can learn, but the don't know you don't know bucket is one of those that once you find out what all's in that, sometimes you realize that you might have a paradigm shift. You might have a complete re-understanding of things, and I think that's what we face. Is that if I went and taught MSPs that you need to deal with each of these things, and operations matter, and the way you handle it matters, and here's the things that go into that, they can be more educated and start realizing the things that they need to be doing. And then it becomes, something much more than just this, I'm buying a tool because I'm buying a tool. And it's for you. You said this, it starts with why, right? I mean, maybe a little bit of cynicism there, but, so Andrew Burton says, listen, as a vendor selling cybersecurity, we're all professional sales educators. You guys are spot on. Thank you, brother. I sure appreciate you. And
Yeah.
I
And
think that, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that you look at other industries, we see this idea of let me continue to educate completely for free because I
Yep.
know that this reaps dividends and it reaps rewards. And I think we're having to solve for like this whole, like, there may not be an ROI attached to this directly, but there's an ROI somehow that comes back into all of this, right? And I just, you see this all the time with like big influencers in other industries that are constantly just giving back and sharing.
Yeah,
And you think like, how often do I like pay any of them? None. But I listen to what they say and it infects my way of thinking. And it even influences the decisions that I make, might buy or what I support because of
yeah,
those things. And so, yeah, I think we're starting to see that in cybersecurity. I think it's a really good thing because I see that it pushes the needle forward. Matt, I know you hear this all the time, but I love when I go to a big vendor conference and people come up like, hey, I listened to you on XYZ, and
yeah.
you've really helped my
It
organization move
touches my
forward in
heart.
this way and this way and this way. And
Yeah,
I'm like, that's what we're here for.
yeah.
It's so good.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where, as a company, you can't necessarily roadmap that on a return on that investment from a dollar's perspective. You see spending, but you don't have this one-to-one correlation to return on that. And traditional sales, like let's say you were a pharmaceutical sales rep, right? You have a drug that you educate about for 15 minutes, you try to get their buy-in, and ultimately you get the doctor to switch to that prescription. So you have that same kind of micro componentry happening, but the doctors already have a large base layer of knowledge. They understand the problem they're trying to solve, they understand the former treatments, hopefully, right? They have some of this body of knowledge. And so I feel like one of our challenges in our industry is that we don't. There is no barrier to be me. There is nothing that says you have to be an MSP. There's nothing that says you have to have this to understand cybersecurity. And that's what our country is struggling with. This is an endemic problem, I think, across the board. And so, trying to find that ROI on something isn't like a sales quota. With those pharmaceutical sales reps, you can one-to-one say these many pills sold from that doctor after 2 months of education. And I'm wondering how much of this comes into kind of that model of how does a company justify investing, and maybe this is a little self-serving, it's definitely a little self-serving, but how does a company invest in a me and pay for that salary and the travel and the work and the effort and the things that go into it, and you can't have this one-to-one correlatable return on that investment. And so, you're kind of touching on a string that's near and dear to my heart, and I don't want to dwell on it too much, but
Yeah.
um
But
so
we're all going down that journey, Matt. Like I totally agree. And I've seen over and over in conversations and experiences that I've had and others as well that are like, my organization doesn't, it's not that like they don't necessarily not want to support it. They just don't know how
right.
to support it. Like
Oh,
they feel
amen.
like they owe back to the shareholders and the board. What is this thing that we're investing in and what is it granting and contributing back to us? And
Yeah.
yeah, I understand that that's definitely hard because I don't think there's ever been an organization ever, especially in cybersecurity, that's been able to directly correlate all of that back. Sure, you might be able to say, oh, I had this one conversation and yeah, it definitely led to a sale. I can see that there. But the
Sure.
vast majority of it is stuff that like you'll just
You
never be able to
infected
know.
their mind. A guy named Wes
Yeah,
Spencer said that. He's brilliant. I'm calling it Wes's law, right? You you
I'll
you
take
through
it.
that exposure infect or kind of, I mean, the term has a negative connotation, but the point being you're able to give them nuggets of power they wouldn't have had before, and those translate into public image of your company. Those translate into buying your SKUs most likely, even if they aren't the best SKU. And a lot of times there's this core, like, let me just be straight up honest. I listened to your crap and I bought Perch. You right? You have to understand, like, this is actually a somewhat for you and me playing out in that way.
Yeah,
3 years ago, when I was listening to your stuff and you said, "Matt, these are things you need to be thinking about,"
yeah,
it laid into me understanding I needed to be able to do it, and it also led me the ability to sell it. It also led me the ability to articulate that and educate my partners. And I think that's the other part that is hard to see, is that we're not just trying to educate them, we're trying to teach them how to have that conversation and educate again. Right. And that's why it's not salesy. It's not, let me show you my platform. It's not, let me talk to you. It's, let me teach you about the CIA triad. let's delve into these componentries that you need to have. And some of that, I think, long term gets solved by barriers to entry.
yeah.
I think long term, if you're going to be an attorney, you have to understand certain things. You have certain barriers. You have certain things you have to be able to articulate. Same thing CPA, same thing doctor, same thing hairstylist. I mean, if I'm honest, right? And yet here we sit where there is none of that. And so don't want to dwell on it too much, but what are your thoughts on where we head from a regulatory perspective? We're trying to
Yeah,
stem that.
you're on to something. So like I've been at Fifth Wall just for a short amount of time so far, but I have some really interesting experiences. I'm going to make a talk out of this one day, but I've been calling people's
Awesome.
babies ugly lately. Um, and here's what
Yeah,
I mean
fair.
by that. So on 3 occasions now, I've ended up with the Fifth Wall has ended up with the agent and with a client, and the agent had
Yep.
been helping the client get through cybersecurity insurance. They're going through their policy. And last year they were fine. This year they got rejected. And
Okay.
so I jump in this call and they're like, can we bring, they call me the cyber guru and I love it. It's dear to my heart. I'm like, bless their hearts. They want to call me
Yeah.
cyber guru, whatever. So I
Call me a
jump on the
cyber
call.
student.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I jump on the call and I'm looking at the application and I'm telling you, man, I could show you these applications and you would see it as quick as I did, probably
Sure.
faster. Of like, oh, you're not doing that and that and that and that. No wonder you didn't get insurance.
Yeah.
Like, wow. And so here I am sitting on this call trying to be Mr. Nice Wes of like,
Sure.
hey, so like I know that you put in a lot of effort into this and I know that you're confused and even aggravated because what you did last year is the same thing as you did this year, and all of a sudden now you're getting rejected and you're not getting coverage. Let's talk about what some of those things are, right? And Matt, it's the normal stuff. It's lack of MFA everywhere. It's lack of user awareness
Yep.
and education, like training kind of stuff. It's
Sure.
lack of EDR, especially managed EDR. Like those are like three of the big things. And then usually it's like privileged account management. Like there's nothing happening inside of all of that. They're
Yep.
sharing passwords around for all the admin stuff. Those are like the normal things that cause these applications to get rejected. And so I see this all the time, and it's an awkward conversation with the client, especially if the MSP is on board, because the MSP is like, yeah, we've been trying to get some of that
I
done and
buy
didn't
your
really.
security package. Why are we failing here? And right is the statement the client makes to the
Yep.
MSP.
Yep. And
Yeah.
so going back to your question, like that's what's happening here is like where we're going to see teeth come into this is definitely in insurance first. And I think
Mhm.
it's going to force that barrier to entry that you mentioned way, way, way up. Because imagine trying to be an MSP in a world in which you can't manage people's risks and you
Yeah.
can't help the client navigate their own insurance requirements that their own clients are making them have. You're not going to be an MSP much longer if you
Yeah.
can't handle that.
Bro, you just like gave the preface to our game show next week. We're doing the game on Friday next week, and we're going to be trying to pontificate on what is cybersecurity's future over the next the next 3 to 5 years. Like, what do we look at and see in that space? And this is kind of one of those conversations of saying, even that insurance form that's asking about MFA, that's asking about PIM, that's asking about PAM, and things like that. Even that is them grabbing at straws too. They're just picking the things that they can actually identify that indicate you don't have a healthy cybersecurity program. And Dom's over here next to me. Before I let go, I'm going to put this comment up. Yes, Dom, I already told on myself for being a hypocrite and doing a beard banter on a Thursday because I'm a
But you
fanboy of Wes. Thanks for
blame it on
poking me,
this
you
guy.
jerk.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
He
Real
did,
quick.
so Dom
Go ahead.
knows, he did try to get it on Wednesday, and I was like, "Hey, please, I got family
Can we
in.
do
We're gonna be at the
Thursday? Yeah.
beach." So Matt was gracious. So yeah, you blame
I
it on
would
this
do that
guy.
for you any day, man. I'd
Thank
change the day of the week for you, brother.
Yeah, so that'll get
Um,
Dom to back off, then we'll
Yeah,
take it.
he just walked out. Now he can go take his
Yeah.
bio break. He feels
He's like, "I'm
he
out."
feels fulfilled at this point. Connor Swam mentioned Cyber Ninja. I'm not super familiar with their model. I know they're an insurance add-on as well, as I understand. Correct?
I don't I don't
Not
know
sure
what
what
he's
the
talking
comment
about.
was.
He'll have to fill in.
Okay.
He's probably
Yeah,
on a
cool.
call at
If
the
he's
same
here,
time.
he can jump in. Yeah.
He's probably, "I'm just gonna
Um,
type in words."
but no, let's take back to the fifth wall conversation and look at that future of cyber in the next 3 to 5 years kind of conversation. Touch on it because I think it's a great one. Is that if the insurance company is only picking the things they can actuarialize, right? Like, is there MFA or not? They're still not zooming into everywhere. And what does everywhere encompass? How much are you even aware of? What programs? Because when that breach happens and when that insurable event happens, they're going to say you said yes. And if that system happens to be the one that wasn't a yes, you not only have this subrogation risk potentially as an MSP, but you also have this potential false claims act. And if you look, we just recently with Aerojet, now that gets into 80171 West, but Aerojet just recently had a DOJ lawsuit that came from a whistleblower over an internal person saying they're not doing what they're saying in false claims act, right? That they're not doing what they're saying they're doing. So I think insurance is trying to solve that and educate. And I do think that insurance, West, is probably driving those critical conversations in a way that you wound up as the security guru coming on that call to educate. And I think that's going to drive the education because oftentimes we're out here saying this and I don't know who's listening. I don't know how many people are consuming. I'm just trying to teach. But when you have people coming in with a real business problem, you're teaching to a willing student. Right?
Yep.
You now have a declined cyber insurance, and that could mean that they have contracts they can't fulfill because they don't have insurance. You're starting to see real business delineations being made. I've brought this one up and I've beat it to death a few times, but about 3-4 years ago, I held a meeting with RSA, I'm sorry, Risk Management, RMA, and Risk Management Association came in, and we had 27 different bankers and insurance providers in the room talking about the cyber loss risk. Right, this was during BEC's ramp up. This was during ransomware's ramp up, and I said to them very plainly, I said, "You own this risk, and here's why: you're the insurer. You're going to take it in the face first. You're the banker. You're going to have a personal guarantee from Matt Lee, and my company's going to go under, and I'm not going to be able to pay it. And you hold the loans and you hold the notes." So we have two forces in our financial markets coming together and coalescing, and they still haven't solved the banking problem. There are no banks that I know of today that are making lending decisions based on cyber risk and cyber risk methodologies in any way. It's
Yep.
all credit. It's all payment.
Yep.
It's all the sky hasn't fallen yet, so we can lend you money. And I think this is one of those challenges where the sky could fall much more than any other business risk. I'm not going to all of a sudden have no hydraulic oil. I'm not going to all of a sudden not be able to, right? But you see those business risks and they kind of play out, but they don't kill it. Cyber can. I've seen cyber end companies. We've seen it. Both together collectively. So I think the challenge is that we've not yet met that full motion of solving this as a country, right?
Yep.
And it starts with education. I think if we're going to get ahead of it, I think the ones that are the most educated, that understand their risks, that understand their shortcomings, that can even do a gap analysis, let alone know what it is, can start to actually come up with real data that can actually drive the health of a company, right? The
And
SEC. Go ahead. Yeah.
well, I was going to say this conversation. You're getting me thinking. This conversation of the future of where all this is going. If you think about it, like you mentioned this, who pays out ultimately the claims? It's the insurance company. So who
Yep.
knows about the nature of the breach? It's the insurance company. They're the ones that understand what happened. They're going to get because they're going to go to their
Yeah.
panel and say,
To help
"Hey,
people
IR
understand
firm."
that, what is a panel? Let's define. So what's a
Yeah,
panel?
what is a panel, right? So you're going to have an approved list, right? Because insurance doesn't want to just hire out any willy-nilly, Wes Spencer
They want
IR.
good data, damn it. They've been getting bad
Total
data for too long. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah. So they're not so they're going to have companies on panel as soon as the breach attorney gets, hey, we've got a suspected or we know it's a breach, they kick things off, and then all of a sudden when services are required to restore, to do the incident response, do the forensics, all this kind of stuff, that happens on panel. It happens like approved
yep.
companies. Just think of people on a list. And so
And
that
it comes
information,
back to the insurance company. They
yes,
get that data. Yes.
bingo. So they become the clearinghouse of all of that data. But we still have a huge problem. We have this problem of, and I know you and I are talking in like back circles a little bit about this, but I'm gonna present
Yeah.
the problem a
Are
little
you going
bit.
to say efficacy delineations in the
Well,
same
I'm
tools and
I'm
products?
I'm going to
Anyway,
say
sorry.
this: we don't have unity on how what that data looks like and how we're
Sure.
sharing that. Like insurance companies are not sharing breach information and the demographics around that with one
Yeah.
another. They're not because they don't have a mechanism. They do have like these big long downloads where they share stuff, but it's not actual
It's
like
not
it's not really good.
normalized. It doesn't give you context to understand. Like you could draw bad conclusions. They had Sentinel-1 and had a breach. It must be Sentinel-1. They had
Yes,
this product. And so that can create bad data out of that
yes,
lack of contextualization and
yes.
normalization in my mind. Yeah.
Yes. And what was the cause of that breach? Who was the known threat actor? What was the industry? How much was demand? Like all of this metadata that does exist is not being collected, disseminated, and
Yeah.
shared. And so that's step one. That's a problem. But step two, you look at like, here's what things are going to move forward is one thing that's going to push the need to have all of that centralized in a taxonomy that makes sense that we can all use and share and speak the same language on this like cyber incident data is what CISA is doing, right? So now that we have passed in that big omnibus, the big cyber, you always have the better way of saying that big cyber insurance.
CIRCIA. Yeah.
CIRCIA.
CIRCIA.
You want to
CIRCIA.
explain what
Yeah.
that is real quick?
Yeah, it's the Critical Infrastructure Reporting Incident Act or critical incident. Yeah, I get
Yeah.
it mixed up, but it's basically talking about critical infrastructure and the reporting thereof. It was part of the omnibus bill back in March.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
So,
you have the government saying, cool, now we want to know about this stuff, but how? How are we going to get it? I
and how
don't
are we ever
really
going
know.
to make the same? And how are we going to get the same context out of each deal?
Yep.
And yeah, you're speaking towards the future on
Yep.
that one for
So
sure.
that's what's going to happen is all of a sudden they're going to eventually get wise and be like, hey, so insurance companies, you got the data, give it to me. And they're like,
Yeah.
how am I supposed to give it to you? Like, what? Like, so yeah, that's where the world is going. And the pathway's already been laid. Like, if you look at the
Yeah.
threat intelligence pathways that have been like CISA,
Sticks and
not
taxi, you mean? In
yes,
the
you look
space
at
of
like
the.
CISA, not the government group, but like the Cyber Information Security Act that was passed in
Yeah.
2015.
Yeah.
That legislated the ability for organizations to share confidential data through their ISAC conduit. So they could say,
Correct.
"Hey, I don't want to share this data because my lawyers are telling me no, but now I'm subpoena free on this data. If I share it through the NISAC, I'll
Yep.
share it. And so, yeah, that's the way all this stuff is going to where
Well, and
we
what's
will
interesting
have,
is once there was an ISAC and you could share, that's when everybody woke up to the problem of we can't share because it's not all the same shit. I don't
yep,
have the same threat intelligence reports. I don't report them the same way. I don't use them the same way. I
yep,
don't activate. And I think
bingo.
that's what drove standards. And that's what drove that kind of normalization of the data sources that we're after that means
Yep.
something, right?
So let me come back to, like, here's what the finished good looks like out of all of this. If you fast forward 5 years, is for the first time we're going to have like actual real time, like good information on here are the breaches that are happening. Here's the actual cost of this. Here are the most active threat actors. Here are the most common TTPs they're using.
Yep.
Here are the kinds of like industries that are being attacked the most. Like, we're going to have
Yeah.
all of this data as reactionary information
And,
flowing from cyber insurance and ingested by CISA and actionable for you and me. That's the future.
one you might not have thought of that goes in that same boat too is you will now know which product's efficacy matches their claims, right? We
Yeah.
rely so much on just histrionic marketing, just crap today, right? And the testing labs are also quite incentivized. And I don't mean to poke or throw rocks here, but I don't think we have accurate efficacy data in the real world from application all the way down to stopping a problem. And what I mean by that is if you think of like let's say I bought, and I used SentinelOne because it was one of the ones I used, but we could be CyberReason, it could be CrowdStrike, it could be, I don't care.
Sure.
The point being, any tool that we roll, the check yes, no, is it applied is not the point. You now have to say, all of them configured the same way. Did these tools stop that TTP or not based on an actuarial data, right? Like insurance doesn't make up numbers. If I'm 100 years old and I want to buy insurance and I want 100 grand, I'm going to pay 120,000 because the insurance company wants to get their VIG, right?
Yep.
Like they understand the data. This is the first instance where they genuinely don't understand the data. There is no correlation to their return on their risk score, right? And I forget the term used in insurance, but they basically look at the correlation of premiums to outlay is essentially one of the values they look at. But now you could actually get to where you could have an insurance company or some normalized data that's being shared universally say, no, that product doesn't do what it says it's going to do because the outcome says it doesn't, and all other things were equal. But to say all other things are equal right now is impossible.
Yep.
If I took 20 of the best MSPs that got it the most, that I call my friends, that make fun of me and I love to death, if I picked those people, their efficacies by the way they fall out in the end won't be the same. And I think your data centric model and more real time data centric model over the next 5 years is probably one of the more accurate predictions for our future. Is that we'll start at least having the data to sort it out.
Yep.
Don't think it's sorted,
No
but
way.
I think we're starting to head down that path to have the data to sort it out. So that's
Yep.
I think a fantastic prediction. I think we're also going to see, along with that, one of the other challenges is this. Server 2008, 8R2 12, 12R2 19, 16, 20, AD Force Function 2003, AD Force Function 2005, AD Force Function, that's not a real one, 2008, 2008R2, 12, 12R2. All of those variables, infrastructural variables, pieces in the middle, risk, where data is stored, how it's used, what we categorize, how do we tag it, what's our risk to the organization, all of those have no normalization. And I think one of the cool features that I'll see in the 5-year prediction of the future, if we go to that space, is you will see more and more of the breadth of companies using the same tools in very similar ways. If you go to Office 365, TLS gets deprecated, it gets deprecated. I don't choose when TLS gets deprecated. It gets done in mass. If you have more normalization of those variables and better understanding of the outcome data, you now can have a much better data prediction on risk, is my point. And I don't mean that it gets completely normalized. It's easier in the SMB than it would be in the mid-market and enterprise. I sit on a CSA advisory where I'm writing the zero trust training manuals for people that are ultimately going to turn into a like CCSK that I have from CSA. They're going to make one on zero trust. It'll be like CSZT or something.
Awesome.
And so I'm writing that training. And what's funny is when we focus on it from an enterprise brownfield model, it gets into crazy histrionics. I asked a simple question one day and said, what if I just started a company and I was only using an identity provider and I was only using SaaS applications and I had some more and more growth in those SaaS applications to feed me back data? What would that look like? Well, we wouldn't need to write all this training stuff in the same way. I'm like, yeah, I just want you to understand that duplicity today that I think is that watershed breakpoint that we'll start seeing more and more of these new companies succeed over the next 5 years that are in that model and be more secure as a result and have lower insurance premiums and be more profitable and be we're seeing corrective financial actions happen for the first time in the SMB space. And the first one was Travelers Insurance last year in June. We're at 1 year of the anniversary when they said, "Do you have MFA on your switches?" Right? Like this got serious, right? But it's enhanced, and you're seeing it. You've now started at Fifth Wall, I think, presumably to help solve that education challenge and to help drive some of these things through that space. So I'm
Yep.
excited about those
Yep.
predictions.
Yep.
Yeah,
And we're excited because, Fifth Wall having access to 35 plus carriers with actual, they know people at these carrier
yeah,
at the carrier level. When you think about, like, one thing Reed says, our president, that I think is good, he's like, a lot of times, like, these big carriers, like the cyber insurance that it's such a small piece of everything that they do. So not only do they not understand it, they don't put the resources to build like mastery over it.
yeah.
And that leads to a lot of problems that exist, and even leads to like channel problems. Like, I'll just throw companies out there. Like, if you put in Huntress on an application, they're like, what's a Huntress?
Right.
What does that mean?
Oh,
Um,
amen.
and
Yeah,
I can tell you exactly what Huntress means and exactly what Huntress does
because
in the
you've
channel, right?
codified it and
Yeah.
you researched it and you know what it does and you put it in its
Yep.
frameworks and
Yep. And so
yeah,
this is where, like, the challenges that the channel has in its uniqueness of like really good channel vendors that do stuff that are not really, that the insurance companies don't know about, or even the unique challenges. Like, for example, this is something cyber insurance carriers have never really thought through before, is privileged access management, right? Like, that's a
yeah,
huge deal for those guys, because from that perspective, like, they don't understand. If I'm just like my bank, I can go get Phycotic and I can check in
yeah.
passwords, all that kind of stuff. No big deal. But an MSP is handling 10, 20, 100, 500 different
We had
clients, all with unique privs.
690, right? Yeah.
That's a massive issue and a
Yep.
massive security control that's way more important. So, like, yeah, even the mechanics involved of like how security looks among MSPs, I don't
Yeah.
think carriers understand at all. We got to fix this
No.
stuff.
And then you take it to this other point. You're not wrong there is that they're asking these companies, maybe not at the MSP, like in that statement, you're kind of talking about a company insuring the MSP. But let's take it down to that consuming entity, the customer that has insurance, and they say, "Oh, yeah, I've got an MSP. They do all these things." Yet they don't even take into the attribution the risk of this one company from the fact that I, as a threat actor, might attack this much larger group and get that one company. Even though they said, yes, we have this in place, I've realized the value of this attack. Right. And I think that's the part CISA obviously is trying to codify and speak about and get up about. But I love this kind of banter on this one a little bit in the sense that, you know, we are just kind of picking up and seeing the pieces of our own industrial revolution. When we take this back, right? We built houses, the roofs collapsed. We made Enron and they could sell to companies they owned and make money. Like we've dealt with this in a lot of different ways, right? If you look at Sarbanes-Oxley, that came from some of those same complexities, some of those same things that said, no, we have to make a normalization of this. We have to have gap. We have to enforce gap. We have to drive. And I'm being a little summative, but the point is that you looked at what that did to the banking industry itself, and what the financial regulations that came down from the feds. You were way ahead of even most corporations at the bank, and we're still behind the threat actors, right? You're still behind what's going to be done from a TTP perspective. But any closing thoughts? We're coming up on the time, and I have a direct behind this, and so do you. So, any closing thoughts for people on kind of make that one last final prediction of what could I do today to be better prepared as an MSP for that future state?
Yeah, this is it right here. It's sort of a dovetail into that conversation. Is you're now risk managers. Your primary role is not the IT guy. We need to stop calling ourselves like MSPs and start, what did you like, managed
Whatever, who cares, right?
risk managers? I
MSSPs,
don't
risk,
know.
yeah,
Yep.
whatever. It's all
Yep. But
marketing
we have
buzz.
got to translate from IT to risk completely in
Yeah,
every
man.
single way. Your job, your primary
Risk
job
and
is not.
empowerment will be the future. There's
Bingo.
risk
Yep.
and empowerment,
That's
both
right. Your
sides of that
primary
coin.
job is
Yep.
not keeping lights green and not amber. Your primary job is helping the decision makers with your clients manage their risk, reduce
Yep.
their cost, increase their ability to scale. And
Yep.
all of that comes down to, let me help you and let me engage with you in these risk
Seat
based
at the table.
conversations.
Yeah. And
That's
it's
the
and it's
future.
what we've always wanted, right? And I think that there's a combination of these two forces coalescing of market conditions and regulatory slash growth of the professionalism of
Yep.
our industry make us what we always wanted to be. We always wanted to have a seat at the table. We always wanted to be part of their business. We always wanted to drive their business forward. So let's get back to that table. And I think that's the change that's coming is you're going to see so many of these things happen that sometimes things just really accelerate. Right. Sometimes you start seeing hockey stick type change in an organization. And that's kind of what I think is coming in the next 5 years. We will not look back at this and feel like it's the same thing. I don't believe that. So,
Yep.
but I'm never right about the timeline. Maybe the what. I've never been accused about the what, but I've been accused about the timeline. So who knows?
Yep.
But Wes, I really appreciate you being here, man. I think you and I
I
could sit and chat for 20
We
hours.
could. It feels like we
Yeah.
just started talking.
We did. It just went by 50 some odd minutes or whatever, 40 minutes. It's how it goes, man. I love it. But I think more of these conversations need to be happening. And the reason I wanted Beard Banter is I wanted people to see these conversations. And I don't want you to take this as a sales pitch. This is just an understanding of go up your game, get better, be better. And if you do, there's a lot of market opportunity. There's going to be a
Yes.
lot of business and a lot of profit to make. So appreciate you, brother. Thank you for being here. Everybody that's watching, thank you so much.